Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out to today's Research Exchange talk. I'm really delighted to present Irma Olguin, who's going to talk to us very soon about diversity and, let me get this right, how diversity and inclusion save the tech industry. And it sounds like an inspiring title. So I'm so delighted to have Irma here. As you know, CITRIS, and I should have introduced myself, I'm Camille Curtin, Executive Director of CITRIS, the Center for IT Research in the Interest of Society, and the Bonato Institute. We're a 4-campus institute, so we're based here at UC Berkeley, but we also have connections with UC Merced, Davis, and Santa Cruz, and so we're really glad to have a representative from the Central Valley and Merced area here to talk to us this afternoon. In 2013, Irma Olguin Jr. decided to build a company focused on strengthening the tech industry in Fresno, California, and leveraging it as the economic driver to remake the city. Bitwise Industries now operates with the goal of activating the human potential for the technology industry in underdog cities across the United States. So Irma has been a startup founder. She's worked across a range of sectors and technologies in the Central Valley. She previously created 59 Days of Code, a software development competition to highlight and encourage the Central Valley's tech industry. She co-founded Hashtag, an open workspace for designers, developers, and entrepreneurs to collaborate, and co-founded Edit LLC to solve efficiency and data issues in the agricultural industry. So I'm really thrilled to invite Irma to the stage.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. If I step over here, can you hear me? Is this thing on? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm going to tell you, of course, about Bitwise Industries. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life, which will make Bitwise Industries make sense. But ultimately, the talk is about how diversity and inclusion can save the tech industry, and we'll get all the way to that by the end of this chat. But I do want to tell you, I feel like people get on stage sometimes and they say, "Oh, I'm so excited to be here," and like they don't really mean it. I super mean it, and I'll tell you why. Like, I grew up in a place called Carruthers, California, which is fewer than 2,000 people in the heart of the Central Valley. And Berkeley was the place that you came if you were super smart and you left town to go to college, which in the place that I grew up was not as common as you might think, and I'll describe that in a second, but Berkeley was like the pinnacle of going to college. It was like, you're not just going to Fresno State and you're not just going to Fresno City, which are fantastic educational institutions, I've learned. But growing up, Berkeley was everything, right? So it was either you're going to go down south and be a Trojan and wear the hat, or you're going to come to Berkeley and be super smart and save the world. And so I actually am, this is like kind of a dream for me in a weird way to be here on this campus and speak to you about the things that are near and dear to me in my hometown and other underdog cities around the United States. So when I say I'm excited to be here, I mean it, and I hope that you take that to heart. I think that we're all super lucky to be in this room together, so thanks for having me. Okay, so Bitwise Industries. So I'll tell you a little bit about why we started the company, but it probably won't make that much sense until I tell you a little bit about my life as well. So in 2013, my co-founder, Jake Soberall, and I decided to start a company literally to fix our city. Which sounds really ambitious and maybe won't make that much sense unless you understand what Fresno is like. Fresno is only 3 hours from here by car. I can attest to that. I just parked 20 minutes ago, drove up this morning. It is 3 hours away. Anybody in the room know Fresno or know the Central Valley pretty well? Okay, a few people. All right. So just context-wise, the Central Valley, which is, as I said, about 2.5 hours, 3 hours away, is responsible for producing between 20 and 30% of the world's food. That's a ton of food, right? It makes agriculture not just the driving industry, but literally props up the entire economy in the Central Valley. So to produce between 20 and 30% of the world's food, you have to be really good at making food, which means, again, that a lot of the population and a lot of the supporting industries are all engaged in that same activity. But what that has created over decades and decades of building up that economy is really sort of this separation of classes. And you're starting to see this across the United States in a number of different places where the wealthy are becoming wealthier and the poor are staying poor. That is the story of the Central Valley, and it's the story of Fresno County. So about a third, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 of our people live in poverty, below the poverty line. This is a true statistic. 4 of the 10 poorest zip codes in the state of California are in my county. We have double-digit homelessness, double-digit unemployment, and are one of the least educated cities in the United States. I'm not saying this so that you'll get on Zillow and look for a house so you can move there. I know I'm not selling you on the place. I'm trying to describe to you that it's just a challenged place. And in many cases, we will describe it as America's most broken city, because in many ways, it is. But America's most broken city is also, again, responsible for producing a bunch of the world's food. And so I'm just giving you that bit of color and context to paint a picture of the place from which I grew up. And so what we did when we started Bitwise Industries is we wanted to kind of study what had happened in other primary markets, places like San Francisco and Portland and Austin. These places that 50 years ago we described similar to the way that we describe Fresno today. Ag heavy, lose more smart people than we gain, out in the middle of nowhere, attached to some schooling systems, but not the sort of top tier schooling systems. 50 years ago, that's how we described all of those places. But those places have turned themselves all the way around, and the way they did that largely had to do with the tech economy, the technology industry. And so we asked ourselves, what did those places do? What did the Silicon Valley and Portland and Austin and Boston, what did those places do that Fresno didn't do, right? And it started out as this really just academic question at first, knowing that we had these challenges, wanting to fix them, thinking that the technology industry could provide an answer to that. We looked at what other cities had done, and we started to form some answers. But in order for those answers to make sense, because when you say that you have a company that builds ecosystems and activates the technology industry in cities the world has forgotten about, what does that really mean? What does that turn into from a practical business standpoint? We saw in our sort of study of these things 3 separate sort of lines of business that made sense to us, that together, if they all worked in concert with one another, if we could lift from all sides, would change the place that I grew up. To make it make more sense, and I'll come back to what those 3 lines of business are, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life story and why we focus on these 3 things so heavily in a way that other businesses haven't proven yet an ability to do. So, and I'll give you some stats to support that in a second. Rewinding though, I grew up in Carruthers, California. It's a very, very small town, ag town, outside of Fresno. Fresno's about 1 million people. The town I grew up in, less than 2,000. I graduated in a class of 86 people, and it was very, very small, which only means that everybody there knew your business, right? And so you know everybody in class. When you grow up in those places, and you kind of know what everybody's family are like, you can kind of get this general sense for what the town is about. And what was really, really clear to me growing up in that place is that there were those of us who got our first jobs when we were very young and in the fields, and then there were our friends, and they were literally friends of ours, who came from families who owned and managed those same farms, right? So I got my first job when I was 6 years old, rolling raisins under the sun in Central California. That was the story of my family, right? My cousins, my aunts, my uncles, my mom, my dad, we all worked in the fields alongside each other. I'm 4th generation farm labor. Not a surprising story, not at all unusual if you're from the Central Valley. And then I had best friends who owned the farms, managed the farms, and came from a very, very different life story than my own. What you notice early on is that folks who grew up in the way that I did, we have a very specific life vision for ourselves that doesn't include things like giving speeches at UC Berkeley. And the folks who grew up, again, friends of mine, under different, more affluent circumstances, they were applying for places like UC Berkeley, right? And that was the sort of distance between us forever and always. It seemed as though all of my life would be spent in the fields under the sun. And so some really interesting things happened that sort of lead to this moment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. When you grow up that way and you don't see anything else for yourself, there are certain things you don't really learn about. There are these pieces of information that turn out are missing. And one of the really, really neat things that happened, I like to tell the story, it's also tragic, right? So it's like both funny and sad at the same time. One of the neat things that happened was that when I was 15 years old, roughly 15 or 16 years old, in high school, I heard over the loudspeaker that they were holding the PSAT in the cafeteria. I didn't know what the PSAT was because that wasn't part of my life's narrative. It wasn't an interesting thing for me to know about. Therefore, you don't learn these things. But the announcement said, hey, juniors and seniors, if you're going to sit for the PSAT, you should leave your class and take your materials and go to the cafeteria. But I'm 15, 16 years old, and what I heard was, if you want to get out of class for half a day, you can go to the cafeteria. So I did. I went to the cafeteria, and I sat for the PSAT, again, not knowing what it was, didn't even know what the initials meant, but would turn out to be the single most important test I'd ever taken in my entire life. I did well on the test. I was a good student. I played a bunch of sports. It was a really great way to stay out of trouble and not get in fights. And so I started, in addition to good test scores, I had good grades to back that up, and I started receiving marketing mail from colleges. And this was a brand new experience for a kid like me, having grown up sort of in the fields and with family who grew up in the fields. And suddenly I'm receiving this marketing material to my home, and it has my name on it, and it's, it's got all the logos of football teams that I'm familiar with. And I take this information to my mom and my dad, and I'm like, colleges are sending me mail, and it's weird to me, but I think they're inviting me to come to their school. And they're like, yeah, that's marketing material. They're, basically trying to sell you on going to their school. But maybe you should take a minute and look at the pricing page and see how much it costs to go there, because your piggy bank doesn't hold that. And so I did, and it was expensive, and I put that away, and I was like, okay, great, thanks for the mail. But really interesting things started happening. Letters, I started reading the actual letters, and there were a couple of offers for scholarships inside of these envelopes. And the scholarships were small, but I didn't know that. I specifically remember a piece of mail from St. Mary's University down south, and I'm paraphrasing, but it said, "Dear Irma, we are inviting you to come to college at our school, and we'll give you $700 a semester if you come and play tennis for us." I can't tell you how much I don't know about tennis. I can't begin to describe to you how much I don't know about tennis, except for that I swing a racket like a softball bat, and that's as good as it's ever going to get. So it didn't make any sense to me that I was receiving this kind of mail, but I was excited about it nonetheless, taking the letters to my family, saying hey, St. Mary's University is offering me money to go. Maybe we should consider this, Mom and Dad. And Mom and Dad are like, maybe again you should look at the pricing page and compare what they're offering to what it actually costs. So again, I put that in a drawer and I move on with my life. But again, surprising thing happens, and I start receiving scholarships, full academic scholarships to go to school. And I did a bunch of research, and I remember when I read the first one, it was from a school in Oklahoma. "Dear Irma, we're going to give you a full academic scholarship to come to Oklahoma to go to school." And I get out my map, and I'm like, yep, that's where I thought it was. It's weird. And I call the school because I thought it was a scam. I call the school and I say, "I received this letter. I'm sure it's not right. I'm sure you're not offering me all the money to go to your school." And they're like, no. You're a good student. Basically, we're inviting you to come here. You just have to show up. I got a couple of those. I got a couple of different scholarship offers, and I did a bunch of research to figure out what the most comprehensive version of a full academic scholarship really is. What's going to cover lab fees and books, and how am I going to eat, and how am I going to live? Because I can tell you, my parents weren't going to pitch in on that. It wasn't possible for them to pitch in for me to live my life in addition to go to school, so I had to figure out how to do both. And so I ended up accepting or wanting to accept a scholarship to the University of Toledo. And I take this news to my parents, and I'm kind of overwhelmed, okay? After I find out that it's not a scam, and that in fact these people are inviting me to come to school, and in fact they are willing to pay for a bunch of it, I don't really know what to do now. It's kind of this, in my head, it's a decision between taking advantage of this scholarship opportunity or staying in Carruthers and being a laborer probably for the rest of my life. That's what I thought my options were. So I take this information to my parents, and I'm like, Mom and Dad, I really think I have to go. Like, I really think I need to leave our family, which is huge, and go by myself at 17 years old to, let me look again. Yes, Ohio is way over there. I think I should take it. What do you think? And they had this super shitty job of having to look back across at me and say, you still can't go if you can't get there, right? And it was like, oh my gosh, like the things you don't think about when you're 17 years old, right? Like are things like whether or not your car has 4 working tires, or whether or not you have a vehicle reliable enough to get you across the country. And so they basically had to say to me at 17, the thing that's going to stand in your way is a bus ticket to get from here to over there. But my family's resourceful, and the story has a happy ending. We spent all summer long recycling cans and bottles. We would literally get out in my dad's beat-up pickup truck, get out, collect cans and bottles from the field, recycle them, and we collected enough for a Greyhound bus ticket. And I rode 2,700 miles from Fresno, California to Toledo, Ohio, to accept the scholarship, which you had to do basically in person by registering. And that was like one of those moments that you don't know is kind of everything in your life. Like up to then, obviously that was going to be an important piece, but also now, double the number of years later, the lesson of that moment is that people who grow up from a story of poverty, it's almost never the things you think, that we think, that stop them from taking advantage of opportunities. It's not whether or not they're smart enough or ambitious enough or have a plan, or it's not those things. It's stuff that's stupid, like a bus ticket. And that was sort of one of those moments in my life that is crystallized forever and informs how we do business today at Bitwise, and we'll get to that in a second. So I'm 17. I'm across the country. I'm all by myself. I'm in Ohio, which was new and very, very different from California. Because in California, we have tamales. And in Ohio, you don't as much. And so it took me a while to find my food. So I'm there in Ohio, brand new experience, scared witless, like I am just completely out of my depth. I don't know what I'm doing. I go to register at orientation, and the lady across the table from me who's taking my registration information, or orientation information, she says, okay, what is your major? And I had to ask her, what's that? And she said, well, what are you studying while you're here at school? And I was like, oh, I have to choose? And like this might sound ridiculous to you all, but not having a plan for going to college, I didn't understand that you didn't always just get handed the classes you have to take forever into adulthood. And so the fact that I got to choose was a new piece of information to me, and I thought really, really interesting, because I guess in my head I thought you would just like test into something the same way you test into like a math track, right, for your high school. And she says, no, you get to choose like what you focus on. That's what you declare your major as. You can change it if you choose to do so. But under scholarship, you don't want to change too much, right, because your scholarship will eventually run out. And I said, okay, how do people normally make this decision? Like, what are the things I should be considering? And she said, well, read the catalog, try to get a description of each of these like offerings, choose one, we'll put that down, and then come and see your counselor later. And so I did. I took the catalog, which I had already like looked through 100 times. And as I was flipping through it again, I saw in there a very shiny building that I had read the description of. It was brand new. A family had given a bunch of money to the school, and they'd built this brand new building, and it was made mostly of glass. And I am sitting there thinking to myself at 17, like, how cool would it be to take classes in a glass building? So I take the catalog back to her, and I'm like, this is where I'm going to class. And she's like, okay, that's the College of Engineering. And that's the story of how I became a computer engineer. So this is not career advice. I'm not saying this, you should do what I did, but it did work out for me. I didn't know what I was doing. It was another one of those moments where you look back and you're like my life was forever changed from that moment forward. Not only would I spend the next 6 years, it was a 5.5-year long program, not only would I spend the next 6 years being so far behind the starting line. I didn't know anything. I barely knew how to type. I'd never used email before. They gave me an email address at orientation. I'm like, what the hell is this? I spent 6 years being the dumbest kid in class, and it was awesome. You know, like it was just like the most challenging experience for me in my life up to that moment, and I was scared all the time. Like I was also one of, I think there were 6 women in a class of 400 or so in the College of Engineering. I didn't even notice. I did not even notice that I was one of like 6 women. I was like one of 4 or 5 minorities in the College of Engineering, and so that further set me apart. I had no idea. These are not things that I was paying attention to. I was at school, someone was paying for it, I was taking classes in a glass building, and I was on a mission to find a good taco in Toledo, let me tell you. And so like that was what I was focusing on. I was focusing on living and surviving and trying to get through this College of Engineering and Computer Science program and not make a total fool of myself, right? I had left home, I was, you know, across the country, like what am I gonna do now except for do this, like do what's in front of me. And so I had the really neat sort of good fortune of being able to go forth into the world, get a couple of computer engineering jobs. And I will tell you another moment that's forever crystallized in my mind when the world sort of shifted underneath my feet. We were working late. It was myself and I think there were 6 engineers total, myself and then another 5 plus our supervisors. We were working super late. We were trying to meet a deadline. I was maybe 20 years old, something like that, in the middle of school. And we decided to order some pizza. And the guy comes to deliver the pizza, and I give cash to my coworker to pitch in for it. He goes to the door, he answers the door, he gets the pizza, and he yells back at me, "How much do you want to tip him?" And I said, "Just have him keep the change." Which I say all the time now, but that was maybe the first time in my life I didn't count out how much money would be left over. And calculate in my head whether or not I would need that for gas tomorrow or for lunch tomorrow or for rent tomorrow. Probably the first time in my life I did not count the change. So those words, keep the change, like it hit me like this ton of bricks. Like first of all, I was also hungry. And so I'm eating and I'm like, dang it, like I just gave away $20 for one meal and I didn't even ask for change back. And so all of these things, I don't know how your brains work, but mine's like, it's almost like watching like a game of Mahjong, you know, where like all the tiles like start moving around again. And I remember thinking to myself like, oh my gosh, this technology industry stuff is going to radically change my existence. And not just me, but my family too, because if I can spend $20 on dinner and not think about it, like imagine what I could do when like my gas is paid for, my rent's paid for, my food is paid for. Imagine how I can help my family, right? Imagine what that might be like. And so again, these moments, I eventually moved back to Fresno and I started this company, which we'll get to. But like these moments, I think this is a really important point, and I want to make sure that we're pointing it out. I didn't grow up the smartest kid in my class. Like that was not me. I was not the most ambitious kid in my class. I was surviving. All of these things to make this moment possible, where I go to school and I get a job and I'm paying for pizza and I, you know, start a company, all of these things had to line up just perfectly for me to capture that opportunity. And it wasn't something that I designed. It wasn't like I was aiming for these specific things. It was that I saw something in front of me and then I bit it, you know, like almost like a dog in meat, you know, and I was going to hang on to that until I ate it or it broke my neck, right? Like those were my options, the way that I saw it. But super important to recognize, I think, that wasn't really, I was not the person putting opportunities in front of me. I was only taking a hold of what was in front of me. And that makes that sort of reliant on serendipity for me to be able to do the things that I've been able to do. And what Bitwise is about and what my chat here is about is that we don't need to rely so much on serendipity. We can change that equation if we're really deliberate about who and when and where we are reaching out to people. So keep that thought in your mind. So I moved back to Fresno. I moved back to the Central Valley. My dad died when I was in college, and so I ended up moving back to the Central Valley to help pitch in, right? So losing a breadwinner like that is a huge event in a family like mine. And so everybody sort of converges and they pitch in, they help out. What I didn't know is that basically spending 6 years in the Midwest collecting all of these experiences and then spending another 4 outside of that collecting technology skills would mean that when I moved back to California, I was basically starting all the way over. I didn't have a network. I didn't come with a job offer. I came for family reasons. And so you're starting a lot from scratch in that moment, which was okay because from scratch is something that my family does well. But I moved back and I recognized that all of the things, all these places that I had been, all the ways that the technology industry had changed places like Portland, Austin, the Silicon Valley, we had not done in Fresno. We hadn't done any of those things in Fresno. We were still extremely, extremely reliant on super labor heavy ag jobs, and we weren't creating wealth, and we weren't changing people's lives with high growth, high wage jobs in the technology industry the way that I realized mine had changed that night when I paid for pizza. So I am now living, I remember this sort of shadow world over here where like opportunity and money is in abundance, and then I come home and it's completely like stripped away. None of that exists anymore. And so in 2013, if we fast forward a little bit, that's literally what we started a company to do, was to take all of the things that I had seen elsewhere, sort of stand them up in the Central Valley and be able to recreate some of that success that we saw in other cities. What does it really look like for the son or daughter of a migrant farm worker to enter into the technology industry? What do you have to do? Is it true that there is just as many smart people in the fields of Central California as there are at Berkeley? That was our starting question. Our starting question was, can you activate human potential that currently is not being invited to the most exciting segments of our economy, and activate them into jobs that are meaningful and that can change their lives? That was the starting question. What does it really look like to do that? We came up with yes. We thought we could absolutely, in 2013, start a company to fix our city. And the 3 things that we came up with were education. How do you teach the son or daughter of a migrant farm worker to code? A sense of place. Where do you go in a place like Fresno? Like, this may be a silly question if you're from anywhere near the Bay Area. Like, where do you go to find the technology industry? I can tell you it's not obvious in places like Fresno, Bakersfield, Merced. You don't know where to go. You don't know where that flag has been planted in the ground. And then the third thing was proof. How do you prove to the world that you can build and ship world-class software, world-class software companies from underrepresented people in underrepresented places? Those were the 3 things. We looked around, we said, these are the 3 things that we have to focus on. That was 5.5, 6 years ago when we started the company. Some really, really neat micro-level sort of statistics since then in terms of success. First one is that 200 technology companies have chosen to locate in our downtown because of the things that we are doing. When we started, there were 6, maybe 8 technology companies in our downtown. 250,000 square feet of technology tenant commercial real estate space has been activated in our downtown. It's really hard to get a sense, if you're not in real estate, it's hard to get a sense of like how many square feet is a lot. I didn't know that either. I know a lot more about elevators and streets than I did before we started real estate. But basically what that means is that we have activated 5 previously blighted and empty buildings in our downtown of reasonable size, right? So pretty big size. Those are sort of the micro level things. We're really proud of that. It means more people are buying coffee and more people are, driving the streets of our downtown. That's cool. What really gets me excited though is the macro level impact. Like, what does this really mean for places like Fresno and other underdog cities? The first piece to the puzzle, how do you take the son or daughter of a migrant farm worker or anyone coming from a story of poverty or anyone who's from a marginalized community and activate them into the technology industry? We've done that 4,000 times now in the last 5 years. 4,000 people have gone through our programs. 1,000 new technology jobs have been created in Fresno alone. 1,000 new technology jobs for people who previously were working between $12 and $15 an hour, have tripled and in some case quadrupled their personal income. And what that means for a person who isn't any longer making $12 an hour but is now making $60 an hour is that they're not worried about how to put gas in the tank. They're not worried about whether or not you have to trade rent for groceries or PG&E for your car payment. Now they can focus on things like, how do I make my community better? How can we address things like homelessness? How can we work on this issue of double-digit unemployment? When you're not worried about that survival, now you can worry about how to make things better for your community. For every technology job that we create, Brookings Institute studied what we are doing in Fresno, and they said for every technology job that you create, 4.3 additional jobs and supportive services are also created. So the net effect of just activating the technology industry, multiply that by four times, and that's actually what's happening in Fresno. That's great too, right? 1,000 new technology jobs results in about 5,000 net new jobs in Fresno. That's all good. But what's most important, and what we think is the game changer, is that new technology workforce is representative of our county. And that means that it is 50% female, 50% minority, and 20% first generation. Thank you. That means that we're taking people who previously were like me, with life visions like mine, and saying, you're invited to this part of the economy, and this part of the economy can not just like radically change your life such that you can pay for pizza, but the life of your family and its community system as well. So that's sort of the ripple effect that we're most interested in. When it started working, we asked ourselves, do we have something that's replicable? Can we take this to other places? There are 80,000 unfilled jobs in California right this second. 80,000 technology jobs in California right this second. Can we do something about that? Is the Silicon Valley addressing that, or are we looking in the wrong places for that technology talent? We think that we're looking in the wrong places. We think the answer is actually going to come from places like Fresno and Bakersfield and Merced. We think that that's where and how diversity and inclusion truly saves the technology industry. We don't need to look in the same places anymore. We can look elsewhere, and we can create the ecosystems that support the saving of that technology industry in a way that is inclusive, in a way that does invite people to the table who were previously left out of those segments of the economy. So we started exploring that. What would it look like to take what we had done in Fresno and sort of pick it up and move it or duplicate it somewhere else? And we realized that what we were sitting on is the answer not just to California's technology problems, but perhaps the United States and perhaps the world if we get good at that. And so we set out to raise money in order to finance that expansion. And in June, we closed a $27 million Series A, which, if you're not in VC, is a pretty big Series A. If you are in VC, or if you care at all, it is one of the largest rounds ever closed by a female Latinx-led company. And so that, for us, was a huge, huge marker in our history. It's great for females in technology, or female identified in technology. It is great for the Latinx community, and it is great for the LGBTQ community to have somebody sort of at the head of a company who's closed that size of a round, because now we can point to that and say, in these underdog places, are things worthy, people, businesses worthy of your investment? And so we announced on that same day when we announced our Series A, we announced also that we would be going to Bakersfield, where we are standing up a new technology ecosystem there to gather and activate technology talent. And then before the end of the year, we intend to announce a third city, also in California, to activate its technology industry as well. What does this all cumulatively mean? It means to us that if you can take a story like mine, and you can sort of create these milestones, which all have to pile atop one another, right? Not just the fact that I went to school, and not just the fact that I started a company and then raised a bunch of money and that have gone to a bunch of cities, but if there are more of me and more of the people that we serve in underdog cities, that eventually bubbles up to changing entire economies in places that we're not currently looking. We're not currently looking at underdog cities to be the solution for anything. But what you do know, if you're from any of these places, is that nobody's coming to save you. Nobody is coming to change the place that you're from. You have to do it yourself. And so we want to look at the people who grew up in these places, who come out of these stories. We want to invite them to the table. We want to give them the tools to change their own lives, but because we believe ardently and in our hearts that that is how you change the national narrative of the United States as a whole. It's how you change the face of the technology industry, and it's how we include people, again, who were previously left out that part of the economy. That is my story. It's the story of Bitwise Industries. I think we're just getting started. And so those are the answers to the questions that we have been asking ourselves for the first 5 years. I'm really, really interested what comes up in the next 5 years, and we're hoping that you'll be part of that conversation by challenging me and challenging us to do even better than that. So thanks for having me here at CITRIS. It's been a pleasure. You can ask even embarrassing things if you want. I'm 5 feet tall.
Hi.
I weigh 130 pounds. 138. Okay, you got me.
Well, you look great.
Thank you.
So what advice do you have to a budding entrepreneur that says, I'd love to start my company or grow my company in my small town, but we all know the best talent is in the big cities?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, and that's partially true. The problem is that the world would have you believe that there's a talent war, and that in order to really compete, you've got to pay outrageous salaries, and you've got to, it's partially true. I think the thing that we're forgetting is that really what we have is talent blindness. We are looking at and for people who that look traditionally successful in their field. Don't look there. Look literally everywhere else. There are smart, ambitious people everywhere. They may not have come from Harvard necessarily to start a company, and they may not necessarily be wearing a Patagonia vest, right? That maybe they don't look like a startup founder, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. There are lots of scrappy, ambitious people that we're just not paying attention to. So I would challenge you to look a little bit deeper than we currently are trained to look. And I'm not pointing any fingers. I don't think that that's anyone's fault necessarily. I think that we've all been conditioned to look for success in very specific places. And we don't have to. We can be more deliberate than that. It took me a while to open this. Did you guys watch that whole thing? It's starting to get embarrassing.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It was great. I'm sorry I missed the first part. I had a meeting, but I caught the end, and I think I caught the gist, which was amazing. One question, and I apologize if you addressed this in the first part of your talk. One of the CITRIS campuses is UC Merced,
Yep.
which is in your neck of the woods,
Yep.
and I'm wondering if they play a big role in what you're doing, or some role.
Yeah.
And again, my apologies if you already covered this.
No, I didn't. So thanks for the question. UC Merced, I'll be honest with you, we were all sad that it wasn't UC Fresno. But very, very happy for Merced. It's been really fun to watch that college grow up. Literally watched it build. They built it from scratch. They started recruiting their first freshman class. They're one of the fastest growing colleges in the United States now at this point. So it's been a lot of fun to participate in that growth. I can tell you that it's a whole engine all by itself, and they're doing some really neat things in CS and entrepreneurship, and in general in supporting the local Merced community. Bitwise has not been integral in that so much as a really enthusiastic supporter of what's happening there. But I did say before that we have some announcements to make coming up, and we're hoping that that is part of it. So without giving anything away, keep your eye out in the news. Thanks for the question. I'm going to start giving you random facts about me if you don't start asking questions. Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm actually from UC Merced and from the Valley,
Yes.
the real Valley, the big one.
That's right.
I just had a question kind of about the culture in the San Joaquin Valley. Someone said that we have a big chip on our shoulder. What do you think it would take for young people in the San Joaquin Valley to not have that chip or to be proud of where they come from?
Yeah, that's, well, first of all, true. And second of all, we have to stop listening to other people. Here's the thing, like, raise your hand if you're even just a little bit entrepreneurial. That's a bunch of you. Here's the thing about being, that's really awesome, by the way. The thing about being entrepreneurial or wanting to start something that didn't exist before is that you have to be a little bit delusional. Like, you literally have to believe things that other people don't believe. And so I think that if we want to change how we market ourselves or how we talk about ourselves in the Central Valley, we have to stop listening to everybody who's a naysayer. Like, there's just no two ways about it. Do it anyway. Start your thing. Try it. Fail if you need to. Start another thing. Encourage other people to take that chance too. And that's another thing too, it's sort of the sister to that piece of advice, is that if you know somebody who's starting something, even if you're not a little bit entrepreneurial, whether it's an event or a nonprofit or whatever, support the shit out of it. Like literally show up to all their stuff, give away your money, volunteer at their thing. It really is your friends that change how we feel about the places that we're from. So support it. Stop listening to other people and support your friends. Those are my two pieces of advice, and that's how I think we change the narrative in places like the Central Valley.
Hi, I'm with Tectonica here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
We're doing free tech training
Yeah.
for low-income women and non-binary adults, and then we give them like a 6-month boot camp, and then we get them placed into jobs with local tech companies.
Dope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations.
It's a great
Big work.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've only been around for about 3 years, so we're still working out some kinks. But I'm curious to hear about your education model.
Yeah. So first, before I get into our model, I do want to say that because of the just incredible shortage of technology skilled people in the world, if I did my highest and best and completely just shot the moon, and if you completely did your highest and best and shot the moon, we wouldn't come close to making a dent in what we actually need to produce in the way of technology talent. So the more people who are working on these things, the better. I have no fear of competition. If we could produce 10 times the number of people into these areas as we do today, we still wouldn't make a dent. So just wanted to begin with that. In terms of our model, we focus really, really heavily on the underserved. So we reach out to rural communities. Like I said before, my story is the story of the daughter of immigrant farm workers. But we also reach out to the formerly incarcerated. We work with veterans. We work heavily with the LGBTQ community. All of these different places. We fund that model in two different ways. So we're a for-profit. I don't know if that was clear. We raised a bunch of money. You have to be a for-profit to raise that kind of money. Our model is, if you are an individual student and you're coming to us to self-pay, basically buy a seat in a class, it's $250 for every 6-week module that you take. Money should never be a reason that you can't take one of our classes. So if you can't afford $250, which I would personally understand, we will find a way to scholarship you. It just might take you a little while longer to get into the class so that we can find that dollar to scholarship you through. So that's about half of our students are self-pay students. The other half of our revenue comes from institutions who typically work with workforce dollars to fund specific people groups into classes. And so they'll come to us and they'll ask us to design specifically for their need. They have an 8-month program they want to run. It's half a day plus a Sunday evening. Well, we will design a specific course for whatever their funding thesis is in the time period and the man hours that are required for that class. And we've done all kinds of things. We have gotten courses approved for A through G credit for high schools in rural areas that have ROP dollars. We have done things for the Department of Social Services for the long-term unemployed to meet their funding theses. But the goal is always the same. We're designing a course with no fluff to get them into a job as soon as humanly possible. And for us, that could look like a lot of things. Could look like 1099, it could look like a W-2 employee, it could look like any number of things. The technology industry in general is very flexible. Was the laws associated with who's a 1099 and who isn't. Let's not talk about the gig economy right now. Gets very complicated, but our goal is the same. Increase the number of dollars you were making before into a job that's high growth, high wage. And if an institution is wanting to send us a full boat of students to do that, we'll design specifically for them. So those are our two funding streams, self-pay and institution pay.
Unfortunately, I too missed the beginning of the talk, but I just wanted to ask.
Sucked.
But I just wanted to ask a question about your process.
Yeah.
Do you teach specific languages as an emphasis like Python or C? And how much of the focus is on training people to use the Merced open source modules that make building platforms so much easier these days?
Yeah, super good question. Because we are directly aimed at employment, we respond only to what the market is asking for. Meaning we will design classes around where we know the jobs are. So if they're using an obscure language, let's say that Community Hospital, which is one of the largest employers of technology talent in our area, decides that they are going to start doing things only in R, which is a relatively obscure language in computer science. We will teach R, and we will set up a class specifically only for that, and we will work with that source of employment to backwards map what a person needs to do on day one, and sort of create classes along the way so that when you're done, you can apply for exactly that job. We do it specifically because we know, and because we don't have the same sort of startup economy that the Silicon Valley has yet. More than 50% of the people who leave our programs to get technology employment are employed at non-technology companies. The county, the school district, the hospital, the tax firm, right? Like, these are the people who are actually doing the hiring in technology in places like Fresno, Bakersfield, and other places, other underdog cities. So we go to those employers and we say, what is it that you actually need to hire? And then we're going to stand up a class around only that. So it's not language specific, it's market specific, and it changes all the time. We have to be super nimble with what we stand up, who teaches it, and what they're aiming at the end. Thank you, everybody.